A lot of people are asking some very straightforward questions. Why would you go after people who are paying taxes and essentially like remove them from the equation, right? So you know that there are immigrants who do not have social security numbers who are paying taxes with ITINs. Why would you detain, deport, terrorize, go after these people? What's in it at the end of the day for anyone to do that? Well, the first thing you need to know is that the beneficiaries of this are the private prison corporations who have government contracts. So public dollars go to basically like henchmen. You have to think about the fact that like the United States doesn't do anything directly anymore. Everything is sort of handled by other parties. Think about every story you remember, but like the horrid nightmare that was like the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, and how like Blackwater and all these sort of like third party contractors like got into the equation. That's how the government does business, right? The government hires companies to build military planes. The government hires companies to do these things. They sign contracts, right? Which is why every jet fighter, every aircraft carrier costs a cajillion dollars. Why wars are so expensive, and why private prisons are so fucking profitable. It's not actually about like the amount of people that get sort of moved through the system, a sort of price per head system. It's actually only about the contract in sum and in whole, and the potential that it has to be able to hold. Remember, there are 11 million undocumented people in the United States of America. So if you want to remove all of those people, you're going to need lots of places to put them. Guantanamo Bay, death prisons in El Salvador, open air concentration camps in the Southwest, like all of those things navigated through private prison contracts. All of those things paid for by your dollars and mine. Our public dollars go to feed that. This is exactly what healthcare and immigration and everything else that's going on have in common. Again, what is the ultimate play happening right now? It's not as simple as like rob the poor and give away to the rich. There is a very select group of people that are being rewarded based on their participation in the Trump regime. And I want you to think about this using a very crude analogy, but I think it is the correct one. Have you ever had to fucking buy something at the goddamn airport? That McDonald's hamburger costs $7 at the airport that costs dollar menu prices on the outside. The bigger the fucking airport, the more of us are trapped inside of it, the higher the prices that we have to pay. We have no choice but to pay those prices when we exist in a closed fishbowl like we do in the United States, right? We don't have ease of travel to another country. The vast majority of us can't just pop into Canada or pop into Mexico to get what we need. We are trapped inside the United States. We have to buy whatever is available to us inside the United States. And so they begin by hollowing out what appears to be, air quotes, fraud and abuse, what appears to be things that are going to non-citizens. But what they're actually doing is they're setting up the entire system to collapse so then you have no choice but to pay airport prices. When Social Security goes down, because it will go down if you take out all the immigrant workers that have paid into it, what you have left is only a 401k system. And you don't have the 401k system you have today, which is a better system because it has to compete with Social Security. You get the airport price fucking version of the 401k system. When everyone on Medicaid is gutted out and shat on, it's not going to be bad just for the people who are experiencing homelessness and the other people who are experiencing hardship in their life, and that's why they're on Medicaid, because it's essentially a program for poor people. It's not just going to affect poor people, it affects everyone else as well. All those Medicaid dollars go away. So for example, in the state of California, 2/3 of the things that fuel Medicaid, aka Medi-Cal in California, are paid for by the federal government. If 2/3 of the money from the healthcare system in California, that is Medi-Cal, goes away, what do you think happens to the rest of healthcare here? Everything becomes more scarce and more expensive. Airport prices. You are going to have to pay more for less everywhere in every regard. So stop thinking about this as like first they came for the immigrants and then they came for the folks with disabilities. They are essentially gutting out this whole situation so that it Jenga towers on us and everyone gets sucked in. If you think that you do not have a self-interest in this fight because you're not an immigrant, you're not autistic, you're not on Medicaid, and you're not close to retirement, you are fucking wrong, because the entire country is getting hollowed out so that all of us are forced to live in an airport and pay airport prices. Why would you go into a trade war with China if you weren't expecting the fact that Americans don't have other choices? We have no other choices. We have to buy what is available. However scarce it is, whatever it costs, we have to buy it. So that's what electricity costs. It now costs more. So this bullshit that drill baby drill and like natural like fucking gas and like coal and all these fossil fuels are somehow miraculously going to bring down the price of power, bullshit. You are trapped in a fucking airport and you're paying airport fucking prices. So instead of getting free solar and free wind and all of the things that we were working toward in that direction, now you pay more. And not only do you pay more for shitty fossil fuels that are ruining the climate and fucking up the environment, now you also pay more for the fact that there are data centers being run and operated by Elon Musk, who's got his bullshit AI center, and Jeff Bezos, whatever the fuck his name is, and he's got his bullshit fucking data center, and Bill Gates, motherfucker, who's like, I'm gonna give away half my wealth. Bullshit. He's also got a bullshit data center, and his is fucking on 3 Mile Island, the site of the worst fucking nuclear disaster in the United States, and they're bringing back nuclear power so they can power data centers. We are trapped in a fucking airport. Everything is going up in value to us. We have to pay more to get less. We have to pay more for the less electricity that we get, the dirty grid, the more climate change, the higher housing insecurity. Everything that we have is going to get gutted out. It is a Jenga tower, and they're taking out pieces. Immigrants being pulled out is going to make us fall. Medicaid recipients getting pulled out is going to make us fall. People getting fired from the VA is going to make us fall. The entire system is going to be taken out and gutted and looted because they don't want government. They don't want a public sector. They don't want things to work. They don't want post offices. They don't want public hospitals. They don't want public schools. They fucking told you they were eliminating the Department of Education. Why do you think that is? They only want a fee for everything system, a fee for everything system, a fee for water, a fee for electricity, a fee for healthcare, a fee for education. And if you can't pay it, fuck you. That is the system they want. And why is that a system that they are willing to like do and build? Because they don't give a fuck. They're already so fucking wealthy. They can just hedge their fucking bets. They don't have to build good businesses. This is not a fucking system in which like, oh, the person who builds the best car sells the most cars and the person that bakes the best pies sells the most pies. We don't have that system anymore. And we will never have that system because they've gutted everything along the way. And we are right now at the tipping point of them being able to get away with this bullshit because they're going to start marking up the federal budget. And the way that they're going to mark up the federal budget is that they're going to like eliminate all the taxes on the billionaires and eliminate all the taxes on the corporations for 10 years in such a way that it's going to cost us $4 to $5 trillion. Us, public dollars, us, our money going to them. Do you think that we can go without having $4 to $5 trillion? Do you have an understanding of how little we are going to have? How desperate we are going to be to survive? How trapped we are going to be in that system without that wealth because it's been transferred to the wealthy? And so, of course, we're not going to be able to sustain anything. And of course, we're going to have to get the shittiest version of everything, and it's going to be the most expensive. So think about the way that things collapse in a fucking airport, where something that goes fucking for $1 at the dollar menu and regular run-of-the-mill McDonald's is $7 at the airport. That is now the cost of your healthcare, 7 times higher. That is now the cost of your electricity, 7 times higher. That is now the cost of your housing, 7 times higher. And you have no choice because you need electricity, you need housing, you need healthcare, you need education. You have no choice but to pay what they charge you. That is the system that they are building. So stop thinking about this as like an attack on immigrants first and then an attack on disabled people and then eventually down the line to you. Because what they're happening to do is pull out all of the pieces of the Jenga tower so that the whole fucking thing will collapse. Your Social Security will not be there. Your private health insurance that you counted on and you think is going to be there is not going to be there anymore. Your 401k, the way that you've had it and imagined it, is not going to be there anymore. Every system in every possible way is going to be impacted adversely by what they are trying to do. It is not simply that they fucking hate immigrants. They do, but they also fucking hate you. And if you're a non-immigrant and if you think that like this is not fucking going to come for you, if you're a non-Medicaid recipient and you think this is not going to fucking come for you, you are wrong. And you need to wake the fuck up. because they want you in a fucking airport paying 7 times as much for every goddamn thing just so you can live.
Undocumented immigrants are not eligible to receive Social Security retirement, Social Security disability, or Medicare benefits. In the current election cycle, there has been a lot of banter back and forth between parties where President Donald Trump has accused the Democratic Party of bringing undocumented immigrants into the United States, which is taking benefits away from hardworking Americans, meaning that they get Social Security retirement benefits, Social Security disability benefits, and Medicare. However, that is simply not true. The truth of the matter is, although there's many undocumented immigrants who are paying Social Security taxes because they work in work settings where taxes are being taken out of their weekly checks, when they go to apply for benefits, they're ineligible. You must be a legal citizen in the United States in order to receive any of those various benefits. So actually, what happens is, people who are coming into the United States illegally, paying Social Security taxes, they're not hurting the Social Security trusts, they're kind of helping it. Because what they're doing is they're paying taxes without the ability to actually draw the benefit of where their taxes are going to. It's an entirely different conversation whether or not people who are undocumented immigrants are taking jobs away from Americans. That's very possible. But the fact is, they are not taking away Social Security or Medicare benefits from Americans.
Did you know in 2022, illegal or undocumented immigrants paid over $96 billion into our Social Security system? Undocumented or illegal immigrants that were in our country working, receiving payroll, receiving checks, they do factually pay into Social Security and systems like that. But my next question to you is, how much money do you think illegal or undocumented immigrants received via Social Security or federal tax incomes in the same year of 2022? How much do you think illegal or undocumented immigrants received? $0, correct. So all of you people out there that think, as I've been saying for the past few years, illegal, undocumented workers, they don't contribute anything. They just get. No, actually, they only contribute and they get nothing. They get nothing. They get no sense security. They get no returns. They get no return on their investment, except they do get to work in America, which is all they wanted. That's all they've asked for. And they do a fantastic job and pay into a system that pays for your white Grammys benefits. So if you're curious, man, I wonder why it's so easy that Elon Musk and Donald Trump can just think about getting rid of Social Security. It's because in their minds, they know that illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, people without a Social Security number, that's all that really means. If they don't get Social Security, but they're paying into it, we could just get rid of all of them. Because then there's no money going into Social Security, right? Well, my friends, you forgot about the millions and millions of people who look just like me, who pay thousands, tens of thousands, into Social Security, and we apparently are going to get nothing. So again, to all you people who think that people without a Social Security number just robbed our system blind, no, they're actually the ones that propped up white Americans that are elderly receiving Social Security benefits. And without their hundreds of billions of dollars, your white granny might have been and might be screwed. Sorry.
I went on a date with a guy the other night and it was kind of a wash. I'm a good time, so I have a good time wherever I go, but he wasn't really bringing much to the situation. And then we get to the end of the date and he tells me who he voted for and why he voted for him. And I was like, I'm going to be honest with you, that's it's kind of a non-starter for me. And I went about my life. And he texted me this morning and he told me, I saw that you took a step back when I told you why I was hoping he would win. And I just want to tell you, I got some news that is really exciting for me, that there's a company that I partner with and they've got a contract, but the contract only goes through if Donald Trump wins. What is this contract, you might ask, that only goes through if Donald Trump wins? Well, this contract is a series of immigration camps that's going to be built in South Texas. And I went, oh, immigration camps. And he said, you know, for vetting and processing immigrants. And I said, oh, that doesn't sound great. And he said, well, I don't really have to work there, right? I'm just partnered with the company. So it's life-changing money for me to partner with this company that's going to build immigration camps in South Texas. And I went, that's not really helping your case any. And he's like, well, I don't have to work there. Yuck. Yuck. And I went, well, you're helping to create it. Like, doesn't that make you feel bad? And he's like, no, I'm helping to protect people. I'm providing like the protection for the immigrants. And I'm like, do you mean the guards? Do you mean the guards at the concentration camps? Is that what you mean? Anyway, I feel like dating as a woman in Florida is really just subjecting yourself to torture no one should have to endure.
The United States is switching to a shadow policy apparatus. Okay, a shadow policy apparatus. We're going to go through it because it's a mix of debt surveillance, migration control, and supply chain domination. And really understanding this will help you see kind of what's going on right here. So don't imagine ICE's immigration enforcement. That's the wrong way to think about this. It is a soft domestic army, not just for immigration, but for control during social and economic unrest, functioning as a pretext for martial enforcement. Economic fear? No. Obedience tool. Obedience tool. Keep recession fears quiet while creating the conditions, right? And then high interest rates, strategic job insecurity, high cost of goods to slowly consolidate behavioral compliance. And then legal ambiguity, right? Because if citizens can be mistaken for deportable, who really has status? This allows power to be weaponized through vagueness. Are you really safe? But
he told the officer that their daughter was a U.S. citizen and could not be deported. The officer said that the daughter would not be deported. The father began to give the mother the phone number of their attorneys, but before he could, he heard the officer take the phone from her and hang up the call, and they were all deported, including the 2-year-old U.S. citizen. No opportunity to speak with a lawyer. Barely any opportunity at all to speak with family. Why? What was the urgent threat posed by this 2-year-old? None. And this is the slippery slope. They start with people who are undocumented. Then it's legal immigrants in the United States. Then it's U.S. citizens who are 2 years old. If they keep trampling on rights, pretty soon, everyone's rights are going to be under threat. This is how it happens. We have to draw the line. So if nothing else, can we at least come together as a committee and as a Congress and say no to deporting children who are U.S. citizens, especially when no access to legal counsel has been afforded? Can we at least do that?
Called Arrived, and it's meant to capitalize on the fact that you can't afford to live anywhere.
I'm sure y'all have heard about this by now, but if you haven't, the short story is that Jeff Bezos has been buying up real estate for some time. He created a company called Arrived where individuals can invest in a home. So multiple people can invest in a home for as little as $100, and then you get returns on your shares of that home. So his solution in a market where people cannot afford to buy homes, where single families cannot afford to buy single family homes, is to create a situation where people are still required to be renters, but have multiple landlords. Right? And I guess this is supposed to push people closer to the American dream. It's a new way to push people closer to the American dream, because now instead of owning a home, you can own a portion of a home. I mean, talk about some dystopian bullshit, because Bezos has been buying up homes for a while. Right? He is part of the problem. He is part of the reason why people cannot afford to buy homes. Right? So all he did was pull the rug out from under us, cut up the rug into a million little pieces, and then sell those pieces back to us. So I remember reading a couple years ago that he was starting to buy up all these homes, right? And my theory was back then that he was trying to, or planning on, recreating a company towns. And I still believe that is somewhere in the future. So if you've watched any of my other videos, I've talked about how I believe corporations and retailers and companies are trying to push people to shop online, right? Because it's more affordable and profitable for them to have a warehouse full of goods with people to, deliver the goods and work in the warehouse than it is to have a brick and mortar store. And so I can see something coming in the future where you have delivery warehouses operating 24 hours a day, right? And
you have people working in those delivery warehouses 24 hours a day. The delivery windows will expand to where you can have items delivered to you 24 hours a day. And what's a really profitable way to do that? What's a way to keep people in a community where they can easily work in these factories and warehouses 24 hours a day? A company town. I mean, open a history book. Towns were doing this, corporations were doing this not that long ago. And so once you have a company town, you want to keep all the dollars in that company town because the company town is owned by the corporation, right? And so just like with other company towns, just like with sharecropping, people are shopping at the company stores and all of that is coming out of their paycheck, right? So my other theory, which I actually had before the housing theory, is the next big step in Bezos' empire and other companies that are wanting to be like Bezos is banking. You can keep all the dollars in the town by banking, right? And we can already see, we have already been seeing the trend starting to move away from cash, right? I've talked about this in some of my other videos. I believe that cashless stores are discriminatory. And so you can create a system where cash is no longer needed. People are operating off of a point system. And honestly, what is banking but not a point system? All of those dollars that you have in your bank account, they're just numbers, they're just digits. They could be Pokemon chips. You know what I mean? Like they could be anything. They could just be points. So we've seen the banking system start to crumble, right? And it's been going through waves of it forever. But, we just hit another wave of it. What was it earlier this year where institutions were starting to fold once again, like we saw in 2008 and 2009. But as we know, with any type of establishment, long held establishment that starts to fold, it leaves room for a disruptor to come in and change the game, for a new way of doing things to change the game. And I honestly believe, and this could sound like paranoia, it could sound like conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, but I honestly believe the space is being made for someone like Bezos to come in, create company towns and create a banking system, create banks like an Amazon Prime Bank, if you will. And it all just makes sense, right? I mean, you have an online empire where people can purchase anything they want under the sun and have it delivered to their door, sometimes within a day or two. You have a chain of grocery stores, Whole Foods, and I imagine that within the next decade, Whole Foods will look very different, meaning I do not think that it will be a grocery store in the way that we know it. I'm sure it will exist, but I think it will exist in a different form. You have now this arrived situation where people can invest in housing. You can already order prescriptions online from Amazon Prime. Company towns are probably right around the corner, and banking seems like the logical next step. I mean, and honestly, what's the next step after that? What makes sense then? Transportation, likely owning a public utility, like some type of private firefighting service or private law enforcement, and I don't mean security guards. This is all very dystopian. This is all very Bond villain wanting to take over the world. And I kind of meant that as a joke, but it's really not funny. It is very unsettling to watch all of these things happen in real time.
Here's a list of companies owned by Jeff Bezos and Amazon for your information so you can make educated decisions going forward. As far as e-commerce and retail, we have Whole Foods, Zappos, Amazon Fresh, Souk, I don't know if I pronounced it correct. It says it's now amazon.ae, diapers.com. For media and entertainment, we have Twitch, MGM Holdings, Audible, IMDb, Comixology, Amazon Studios. For tech and cloud-based companies, AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, Annapurna Labs, Elemental Technologies, and for healthcare, we have PillPack and One Medical. There are other acquisitions like Kiva Systems, which is a robotics fulfillment center program or company, I should say. Ring, which was news to me, and Arrow. There's more. Jeff Bezos has financed a lot of companies since he's been in business, including Airbnb at the beginning and Uber at the beginning. But he doesn't own a majority sharehold or stake in those companies, but he has his foot in everything in this. This is what all these major CEOs and billionaires did, is buy up all sorts of stuff. So they have their fingers in all sorts of pots. And it's really good to know who owns what so we can make choices. So here you go. I'll upload it to all my social media and my Substack, but here it is for your reference. I'll get out of the way so you can screenshot.
This was always the plan. This was always the plan. Before I say anything else, everything I express in this video are my opinions and my views, and for entertainment purposes only. This was always the plan. To overwhelm systems that function for the purpose of providing for the citizenry of this country. That was always the purpose. To make the federal sector inept, inadequate, so as to trickle down into state services, into local services, overwhelm them because of the ineptitude and the incapacity of the federal level, and then to slowly point out by those at the federal level that, hey, these states aren't able to handle what they're doing. Maybe we need to look into cutting them too, right? At least 100,000 employees have been terminated across various federal agencies and departments over the last 7 weeks. 100,000 at least, who no longer have income, a reliable source to provide for their children, maybe to provide for their significant other who maybe can't work. How many people does this affect besides the at least 100,000 employees? And tens of thousands of probationary employees have also been let go, and more reductions are expected in the near future. They are saying they had no time to prepare for unemployment because of how fast this happened, and that there's minimal communication with the administration about obtaining benefits. Does this surprise any of you whatsoever? And as a result of this, states are being inundated with social service requests for unemployment with little to no warning and dwindling financial resources. 19 state attorney generals said in a court filing last week. 19. So when I talked about at the beginning that, again, in my opinion, which is very observable if you just look around and pay attention, this was always the plan. When Donald Trump says states' rights, he said that in order to get what it was he wanted. He doesn't really care about states' rights. If he did, if he cared about the states that he oversees as the highest official in this land, if he cared about the union of the people in this land, he wouldn't be inundating through his decisions state and local resources and institutions so that they start to fail in what it is that they normally are capable of doing. He doesn't care about state or local offices. He doesn't even care about his own office. A man who litigated against his own oath of office. You think he really cares about the suffering and the spiraling of these state and local institutions as they struggle to carry the burden of decisions that he's made to the federal level? And listen to what Maryland Attorney General Anthony Brown wrote. In addition to the informational and procedural injuries resulting from the deprivation of notice to which they were entitled, that notice. The lack of notice has impeded the ability of many plaintiff states to support the affected employees and thereby mitigate the financial and other impacts on state services because they were let go in a way that doesn't abide by law and order, by rule. Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that. It is plain to see.
Earlier today, a VA whistleblower sent me this. This is Donald Trump and Elon Musk's plan to destroy the Department of Veterans Affairs, the healthcare and benefits system that millions of veterans depend on. How are they going to do that? They're going to work with their little crony, VA Secretary Doug Collins, and they're going to fire 83,000 people who work at the VA. As you might know, about 1/3 of all federal employees are veterans. So we're talking about an increase in jobless veterans by tens of thousands from this cut alone. And we're just talking about VA employees, not to mention that some of these people help veterans get jobs. Others are doctors and nurses. Others process claims and benefits. Now, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs keeps coming and creating these cute online videos to talk about how he's changing things and shaking things up, and veterans shouldn't expect the status quo. And to be honest, I don't think he has any idea what's in this memorandum. It's not worth the paper it's written on. So this is the guy, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Doug Collins. And apparently, he's not busy enough because Donald Trump tried to give him 2 additional full-time jobs to run the Office of Special Counsel and to run the Office of Government Ethics. And maybe that's true. Maybe he's not a full-time Secretary of Veterans Affairs because he's got Elon Musk doing his hiring and firing decisions for him. Nobody ever voted for this guy. This billionaire's only interest is stripping veterans and Americans of earned benefits. His goal isn't just to enrich himself through government contracts. And he's not just trying to eliminate government contracts for his competition. Elon Musk and his doggy boys are going into the VA and canceling contracts for veteran small businesses for things like suicide prevention and helping veterans end homelessness problems. This guy is cutting cancer research for veterans. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs should be ashamed of himself. A Hitler-saluting Elon Musk running the VA for him? No, for veterans, this is not acceptable. And this guy, Donald Trump, another billionaire who wants nothing more than to lower his and his friends' taxes on the back of veterans who served this country. He goes around and says how he's so great for veterans and you can't build a strong VA and gut it at the same time. This guy is sending his cronies out to lie for him and to say that by removing services from the VA, they're going to provide more services at the VA. Look, this guy keeps going around and saying that veterans love him. That couldn't be further from the truth. Look, if you're pissed off about what Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Secretary of Veterans Affairs Doug Collins are doing to you and your healthcare system, how they're trying to cut veterans' benefits and make it so that we're stuck in waiting lines all the time, if you're disgusted by the fact that Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Doug Collins want the new VA motto to be delay, deny, and hope that they die, do me a favor and post a video of you making confetti out of these guys. And post a video where you describe how these cuts are going to affect your life. And show Donald Trump what you think of him.
Charter school is a school that is publicly funded, paid for by your tax dollars, but it is also privately owned. So that means that it can be owned by a corporation, a business owner, entrepreneur. It could be owned by Kanye West. I don't know. It could be owned privately, okay? Charter schools are an option for school choice because school choice policy says, hey, the school that your child is zoned for, they didn't do well on last year's standardized test, but there's this new shiny school a couple towns over. The teachers can do the Dougie. We have a TikTok account. We painted the hallways with graffiti, and there's a slide in the main office for no apparent reason. Come to our school. It looks super fun. You'll love it here. Now, mind you, this shiny new school probably doesn't have any testing data. Okay, it's a brand new institution. So the reason, follow me, the reason that you're leaving the failing public school is because they have bad test scores and they're a bad school. But this new school, this new shiny school, they could also suck at testing, but the aesthetic is nice. But you just don't have any data on that yet. The language, the messaging here is just that school is bad, we're better. Come over here, bestie. Upon further investigation, you will learn that students for charter schools are chosen by lottery. This is different from registration at a public school. Basically, families have to apply for their students to come to the school. And even though the process is supposed to be random, hence the term lottery, usually students with learning disabilities who require SPED services or students who are English language learners, they are admitted to charter schools at significantly lower rates. And this is because students who require these services cost the charter school lots more money, and usually they perform lower on standardized tests, which is just not good for the charter school brand, boo. Charter schools avoid special needs students.
I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
You've got to look at entitlements, though, too, do you not?
What we're going to do more than anything else, we're going to cut tremendous amounts. I'm not touching Social Security.
Entitlements ever be on your plate?
At some point, they will be.
If you don't cut something in entitlements, you'll never really deal with the debt.
We'll be cutting. I will always protect Medicare and Social Security.
Have you changed your outlook on how to handle entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Mr. President?
There is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting.
You'll never touch Social Security as long as I'm around, and you'll never touch Medicare.
Breaking news. The Trump administration just announced that Medicare will stop covering telehealth starting April 1st. This is going to be devastating for so many seniors who are homebound or don't live close to a doctor's office. Look, you don't have to be the congressman from Silicon Valley to know that doctors and nurses should be able to use telehealth if they think that will make their patient's life better. We need to stand up to these Medicare cuts.
First, we're going to reduce chronic disease. How do you do that? 70% of the healthcare expenditures of this country are driven by chronic disease. And it is your patriotic duty, I'll say it again, the patriotic duty of all Americans to take care of themselves, because it's important for serving in the military, but it's also important because healthy people don't consume healthcare resources. The best way to reduce drug spending is to use less drugs because you don't need them because you're healthy. And it feels a lot better as well.
Hey, I need you guys to hear this. The Donald Trump administration just ordered massive service cuts to the Social Security Administration. We're talking about cutting around 7,000 jobs and shutting down 6 out of 10 regional offices. That means fewer workers, fewer offices, and longer wait times for millions of people who depend on Social Security. This isn't just numbers on paper either. This affects real people, seniors, disabled folks, people trying to get benefits they've earned their entire lives. These cuts are going to make it harder for them to get help, apply for benefits, or even fix errors in their payments. And to make it worse, starting at the end of March, they're ending the option to verify your identity over the phone. Now, you either have to do it online, which, let's be honest, many older Americans can't easily navigate, or they have to show up in person. But how the hell do you do that when your nearest office is closed? This isn't about making things more efficient at all. It's about making it harder to access help. It's going to hit the most vulnerable the hardest, and we need to be loud about this. People need to know this is happening, because if we stay quiet, this just becomes the new norm.
Is there any single Republican who is willing to speak out to make sure that children, people with disabilities, and veterans do not go hungry? Anyone? Silence. SNAP is a true lifeline, and this is a matter of life and death. If Republicans have their way, this reconciliation bill will increase hunger and food insecurity. More than 42 million Americans, 42 million, participate in SNAP each month. This includes 16.9 million children, 4.5 million people with disabilities, and 1.2 million veterans. Over 1.1 million people in Massachusetts rely on SNAP. Let's talk about economic impact. For every $1 in SNAP benefits generates $1.50 in economic activity. SNAP dollars help to pay the wages of grocery store clerks, of truckers who deliver food, manufacturers who make food packaging, and the farmer who grows food. There is nothing efficient about making people hungrier and sicker. This bill is a shame and a sham.
Private equity has a very mixed record whenever it comes to the healthcare industry. Let's dive in and see particularly how private equity impacts hospitals. Private equity has invested over $1 trillion into healthcare over the past decade. There are about 460 hospitals in the United States owned by PE firms, and they account for 8% of private hospitals and 22% of for-profit hospitals. Now, this highlighted fact about rural hospitals is very interesting. About 26% of PE-owned hospitals are in rural areas. One of the main purposes of private equity is to provide capital for expansion into areas that are harder to break into when self-funding. I think the main benefit of private equity in healthcare is going to be hard to evaluate and study, that of increased access to care. Whenever a firm gets an investment from a PE company, they're able to open more locations and provide services to populations that were previously unserviced. However, private equity may not always be used for expansion, as you can see in this paragraph below, where this article talks about investing solely to loot out the hospital's valuable assets, do sale leaseback of real estate, where you sell the valuable assets and then lease the buildings back, and then also cutting critical, less profitable services just to increase profits, but at the expense of quality healthcare. This meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal reviewed 55 different studies of private equity in healthcare, and they found a general trend of increase in access and market penetration for healthcare after private equity investment. Unfortunately, the same meta-analysis also found an increase in cost for services after private equity acquisition. However, I found this study-by-study analysis to be really interesting that found that the amount per claim was higher, meaning the hospital was charging more, but the discharge amount, meaning the amount actually paid by the customer, was lower. This implies that private equity firms may just be better at exploiting insurance companies, but then again, that's bad too because it just raises insurance costs for everyone, making healthcare less affordable. So the increased cost here does seem to be pretty problematic. There is a lot of evidence that after acquisition, hospitals are able to provide a lot more services and become more utilized compared to before. It's because private equity companies tend to be experts in efficiency and operations, and they pass along that expertise to the hospitals, meaning hospitals can provide more care with similar amounts of staffing. The evidence about quality of care after acquisition is mixed. The study above references that there's lower inpatient mortality after private equity acquisition, but there's also some talks about long-term quality metrics declining. That same meta-analysis from the British Medical Journal also finds mixed results about healthcare quality. Finally, there's this 2023 JAMA study that found that falls and infections increased after private equity acquisition. This seems kind of random, and I'm struggling to find a correlation here. Maybe it's this, they're sloppier, they're understaffed, but that same study did find that deaths decreased, but after controlling for people leaving the hospitals for different ones, you couldn't find that same effect. So again, the evidence here is mixed. There's a massive push right now to limit the types of financial activities that can surround hospitals. Massachusetts and California want to have reviews of any kind of private equity acquisition of a medical company. And there's a lot of states that have already done this, including Illinois, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, and Washington. One interesting reference point here is how law firms are owned. So only lawyers are allowed to own interests in law firms, and the idea is that you want people loyal to the creed of the practice to own it to make sure that incentives are aligned with the way you're actually executing and practicing law. The same restriction doesn't apply for the medical field. Doctors aren't the only ones that can own medical practices. You can also have private equity investment into the hospital. I'm not saying this is the right solution for the medical world, I just think it's an interesting reference point that fully aligns the ownership and monetary incentives with the ethics of practice within the field. My personal takeaways from this is that private equity is good in healthcare if it's used to expand services, especially to regions that don't otherwise have it, and if any kind of practices that are implemented are focused on efficiency and not simply raising costs and cutting quality. Let me know your thoughts on this. I hope I engaged in this conversation in a thoughtful and intentional way.
Amazon in the last 6 months has announced $50 billion of new data centers. They have to go hire people to go build these things, right? Like you're going to go to some town. There's a company called CyrusOne. There's another company called QTS. These companies are the real estate developer for data center. So Microsoft or Amazon goes to this real estate developer and he says, hey, I want you to build me this data center. And the real estate developer goes to this company called DPR. DPR is the biggest general contractor in building data centers. DPR goes and finds a subcontractor. The subcontractor needs to go find you 1,000 electricians. I mean, labor is the single biggest cost in data centers. And now you're putting ads on Facebook and you're like, electricians needed. Please come to this random town in the middle of Illinois. We need you to come build a data center, right? And then you have all these people. They're getting on planes. They're going to be put up in hotels. Like, just the sheer physicality of what's going to happen in the next 12 months is pretty awesome.
In the news today, the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant is restarting after being shut down for 5 years. Microsoft is buying the output of the plant to power its data centers. I'm Travis Fisher. I'm the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. My takeaway here is that data centers are increasing their demand for electricity, and one of the only ways that you're able to get new electricity legally, especially that's reliable and affordable, is through reopening old nuclear power plants, because the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has essentially outlawed the build of new natural gas-fired power plants, which is probably the next best alternative.
Plans are underway to reopen the shuttered U.S. nuclear plant 3 Mile Island. The cash-strapped plant located just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, shut down 5 years ago. On Friday, Constellation Energy announced that under a 20-year deal, it would sell power to supply Microsoft's data centers. 3 Mile Island is the site of the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history. The 1979 accident left the plant with 1 reactor. Constellation plans to restart operations in 2028. Pending government approval.
Name of the game in Silicon Valley is very simple. You start a company based on benevolence and predicated on and you use words like this. You go in front of your colleagues at Stanford and Harvard and you go, I want to create a company that democratizes knowledge. And then everyone goes, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing, Sarah. Amazing. And then 10 years later, you're at the Pentagon and you're going, we need to murder these terrorists.
And finally, you need a CEO. And a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. One way of dealing with that is that I think there are really 2 sets of Americans. There are red state Americans and blue state Americans, Christians and communists, basically. Christians don't want to live under a communist dictator, and communists don't want to live under a Christian dictator. There's a very easy solution. There's a very easy solution to that, which is simply hire 2 executives, have them make sure they work together, and there's really no other solution to getting there's just simply as you don't have the power as Democratic voters to create an organization that can actually shut the system down, let alone take over the task of governing.
Call me a conspiracy theorist, but this all feels like a setup for company towns again. Between disempowering workers' rights, disempowering unions, removing regulations that were written in blood, by the way, down to crashing our economy, tanking the value of the US dollar, allowing private corporations to buy up house after house after house, the amount of renting places we have, the way that everything is going to subscription-based where you don't actually own anything. It feels like a big push for slavery in company towns. Because when the dollar is not worth anything, and then these companies come in with their really, really sketchy manufacturing facilities and their mines, and these very intense physical labor jobs that trapped people in chains for generations, you'll be thankful because they have a steady supply of food, they have a steady supply of homes, they have a steady supply of healthcare, which, by the way, is just going to allude to, oh, sorry, you got cancer from the food that's no longer tested because the food now has lead in it, because it's cheaper to densify the food with lead shavings that you just don't notice. Why else would they get rid of the regulations? Why else would they cut so many government oversight programs and nothing else? Why else would they cut childhood cancer funding? Why else would they be pushing so hard for resegregating everything? Why would they be pushing so hard for everyone to be terrified that if you step out of line, you're going to get sent to El Salvador? You're going to get sent out of the country, even if you're a U.S. citizen. Because people are complicit, people are complacent. So long as people keep defending the government and what they're doing, they're going to keep getting away with it. You have the working class eating itself because they have taught people that instead of listening to people who have spent 10 to 15 to 20 years of their lives researching and dedicating themselves to higher education and to understanding things like disease, doctors, the distrust in the educated, it feels like one big play to bring company towns back. Because that way, even when there are company towns and you have those few people that go, hey, this is bullshit, you're not going to listen to the educated person because you think you're smarter than them. They'll have company schools where they teach people the value of being an Amazon worker. They'll have the values of being a true American patriot is working on the manufacturing lines. It just feels like a setup. I can't get it out of my head. It's that sinking feeling in the back of my neck where it's just like, the deeper play to this is absolutely diabolical, and I feel like no one is actually talking about what their end game is for all of
Musk isn't just building rockets. He's carving out a corporate kingdom. In Bastrop County, Texas, Musk is developing Snailbrook, a company town where he controls the jobs, the homes, and the land beneath your feet. He calls it a community. History calls it a trap. Company towns have never served the people. They exist to extract, control, and discard. George Pullman built one outside Chicago, promising workers a better life. When profits dropped, he cut wages but kept rents high. Families starved while he lined his pockets. When workers rebelled, federal troops crushed them. U.S. Steel did the same in Gary, Indiana, Henry Ford in Michigan, coal barons in Appalachia. The pattern never changes. They own the stores, the homes, the paychecks. They build dependence, then weaponize it. Musk is no different. Starlink dictates who gets internet. Neuralink experiments with controlling the human mind. Tesla builds a town where your boss is your landlord. Lose your job, lose your home. Speak out and you're erased. This isn't progress. This is a return to the Middle Ages. Lords and serfs, masters and servants. Feudalism in a Silicon Valley skin. Musk doesn't dream of the future. He dreams of owning it. And if you let him, he will own you too.
About Elon Musk reportedly building a town in Texas for his employees to work and live in. And
y'all are not afraid of the company town. So, and it sounds so nice, company town. It makes you think of just like, everything is nicely planned. And most people don't know about that history. What you do know about is sharecropping, which works pretty much the same way. So let me re-enlighten you. So, after slavery, when you could no longer keep people on your land and make them work for you for no money, these plantation owners instituted sharecropping. And here's how it worked. You lived on the plantation owner's land. They gave you a portion of the land to work. You bought your seed from the plantation owner, and then they charged you for materials, for the use of the tools. They charged you rent for the land. Because you couldn't really leave or go anywhere, they also charged you for, or rather they were the person that you got all of your materials from in regards to like your clothing or other things that you might need. They may even pay you in something called scrip, which was just kind of like notes of or an IOU. Then at the end of the season, you would bring in all of your crops. They would determine the worth of those crops. Of course, you could not read or understand, what was going on. You couldn't bring those crops in yourself. And then they would tell you how much you owed. And usually you never came out on top. You ended up, owing the landowner money at the end of the season for all of the materials that you used over time. And then you would just end up in more debt year over year over year. The company town does the same thing. So imagine you go to live in Google Town, and of course you're not going to be doing all of your shopping at the regular space. They're going to make sure they have all the amenities there. All of your daycare is going to be taken care of. The schools will be taken care of there. They're going to have special things added onto it to make it sound really nice, so that you put your, all of your rent, all of your eggs are all in that one basket. So when they do that, that means you can never leave. You can't get upset with the company and demand more pay. You have to get out of your house. You have to pull your kids out of school. You won't be able to pay for your own groceries, or maybe they'll say, don't worry about it. We'll give you a cut on it. So everything's just a little bit cheaper inside of Google Town than it is outside of Google Town. And next thing you know, the person who runs Google Town runs you as well. And you don't have anything to show for it, especially if you run afoul of the Google Town owners. Now you don't have a house, you don't have any money, you don't have your kids, you have nothing.
I think we're at the dawn of a new era. I think it's going to be very exciting.
We are at T-minus under 33 minutes and counting.
I'd love to have SpaceX be the company that brings humanity to Mars, and I hope I see it while I'm still alive.
I mean, are we going to Mars or not? Right now, we sure are messing a lot of stuff up in our area here.
Brownsville, Texas sits at the southernmost tip of the United States. It's a border town of 200,000 people. 10 years ago, it was upended by the arrival of a very famous new resident, the richest man in the world. Many residents are glad that this $350 billion company moved into a town that has struggled with high unemployment for decades.
We need this area to grow. It's the poorest county in the nation.
If we don't grow, we're gonna die.
Come here, Elon. Did you see his rocket yesterday?
President Trump has promised to support Musk's vision for interplanetary travel.
We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah!
But what's actually happening in Brownsville, where Elon Musk has already staked his company's flag?
We're a disadvantaged community that's being exploited by a billionaire for his experimental space fantasy.
We used to go a lot. I mean, before I even married, we would go, and he would go with his family also. And then once we married, we had boys, we were there probably every weekend.
It was just a very serene place. I mean, it's still beautiful when you can get there.
Renee and Ida Medrano live just 17 miles from Boca Chica Beach, where SpaceX launches the rocket Starship, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, and the one that Elon Musk says will take humanity to Mars. The Starship, which includes the booster Super Heavy, is a 5,000-ton rocket made of stainless steel, designed to carry up to 150 metric tons of cargo, which Musk says is necessary for his Mars colony.
The launch is here. The rocket is right here, and you can hear it, you can feel it. You can see the fire, you can see the Raptors, and you see the smoke, and then all of a sudden you hear those booms. Our dog Miller was running around. It was loud. It sounded like
a bomb?
A huge, dangerous, super explosive bomb.
What was once 1,400 acres of beach and wetlands is now home to SpaceX's building facility, launch pad, and a continuously growing town where employees live, called Starbase. The rocket launches 5 times a year, but right now SpaceX is applying to launch 25 times a year.
It's a shame that it got to this point, as big as it is, and probably going to get bigger.
Musk came to Texas to pitch his private space launching facility in 2013.
This will be the first commercial orbital launch site in the world.
And warned that the company was also eyeing Georgia, Florida, and Puerto Rico.
We are looking at other potential launch locations.
The year before, Musk had spent $12,000 in campaign contributions and hired a lobbyist to court local politicians. SpaceX spent a total of $219,000 on gifts, trips to SpaceX headquarters in California, and even a Lakers game. Texas is a billionaire-friendly state. They have no corporate tax or state income tax. But SpaceX wanted more, and Governor Rick Perry and the state officials were eager to win this bid. In exchange, Musk promised millions in growth.
Our competition for this in Texas is very serious.
When we first met with Elon, he explained the project to us. And then he asked us, do you know why I'm doing this? And he kind of, backs away from the table and looks at us and says, humanity can no longer sustain itself on this planet, so I'm gonna help with that by colonizing Mars. So at that moment in time, number one, I thought, I'm fired. How am I gonna go back to the poorest community in the United States and tell my leadership, hey, let's use our hard-earned tax dollars to incentivize and recruit a company to our community. And the reason that they're doing this is because they're gonna save humanity by colonizing Mars. It was just so out there.
Gilberto Salinas co-founded the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation, an organization that allocates city taxes to attract businesses.
People laughed at us, but we're like, if we're able to align everything, it might be just that deal of the century.
Salinas' organization chipped in $5 million in incentives, and the state approved an additional $15 million, as well as a 10-year waiver on county taxes. 10 years later, in 2024, SpaceX released a report claiming they had invested $3.5 billion in infrastructure and created 3,400 new jobs. To Salinas, Musk had kept his promise.
I think any business person will say, you invest $5 million and 10 years down the road, those $5 million are going to turn into $3+ billion. Yeah, I would do that deal any day.
In 2014, SpaceX broke ground.
The future of South Texas takes off right behind me. This was the frontier at one time, and it's the frontier again.
Musk is really good at getting government subsidies. In the last few decades, he's gotten hundreds of billions of dollars from federal grants, tax incentives, and state contracts for his companies Tesla and SolarCity. SpaceX was near bankruptcy, and Musk was deep in debt when NASA gave the company a massive handout in 2008.
NASA called and told us that we'd won a $1.5 billion contract. And I couldn't even hold the phone. It's like, I just blurted out, I love you guys.
They saved you.
Yeah, they did.
Financially and maybe even emotionally.
I'll tell you what, that was definitely helpful. Yeah.
But do those subsidies really pay off for towns like Brownsville?
We are a low-income community. We're primarily brown and indigenous. We have a very unique and beautiful community.
Becca Hinosa is a local environmentalist and activist who has been fighting SpaceX for years.
Our people here, we do need jobs. Most of us are in survival mode, and we're in survival mode because we've been exploited so many times by so many different industries, and now SpaceX is part of that.
Musk has a reputation for forcing high speeds on his workers and lacks safety standards at his work sites. Reuters reported in 2023 that there had been 600 injuries at SpaceX locations since 2014. One worker has been in a coma after an on-site accident for 3 years. Another lost vision in one of his eyes after being struck while moving a beam.
Ya no miré yo nada completamente, entonces yo le gritaba a mi amigo, perdí mi ojo, perdí mi ojo.
Musk's worksite in Boca Chica has an accident rate 6 times higher than anywhere in the space industry.
Lo que yo miré, he visto yo allí en ese trabajo de SpaceX, no hay suficiente seguridad. Ahí no hay.
Besides the $5 million Brownsville gifted to SpaceX when they first arrived, the Greater Brownsville Incentives Corporation has since spent another $1 million to attract space-related startups. Hinosa says it reminds her of a different time in South Texas's past. About 100 years ago, when rich landowners and politicians in the lower Rio Grande Valley tried to lure white settlers to the region to farm. The lower valley was majority Tejano, Mexican Americans who had lived there before Texas was even a state, and it still is today.
They advertised our low-income people as cheap workforce and cheap land, come here and exploit.
Since Musk's arrival, the launching site and the SpaceX campus have grown, much faster than Hinosa and the Medranos ever imagined.
Never did we think that they would be taking over the entire area. It was just Elon Musk is going to come in, he's going to build a little pad, he's going to have a launch, and that's it. But now it's totally different than what was explained.
The thing that bothers the Medranos the most is that they can rarely go to Boca Chica Beach, a beach the state of Texas and the city of Brownsville promised the public would be able to visit. The Texas state constitution guarantees access to all public beaches, but in 2013, the state amended the Texas Open Beaches Act to carve out space activity. Now the state is free to close the beach anytime SpaceX wants to launch a rocket. And it turns out that's a lot.
They'll send a text and they'll say Boca Chica Beach is now closed. And if we're planning to go out there, that's it. Unpack everything. And then 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, I'll get another text. Boca Chica Beach is now open. Well, who's going to go out there at 10 o'clock at night?
You're on their time. You know, you're on SpaceX time.
Local people call Boca Chica Beach the poor people's beach because this is where people come to fish. We come to the beach with our families because it was free and open to the public. And SpaceX is changing all of that rapidly.
Boca Chica Beach is not only a popular spot for fishing and swimming, it's also a complex ecosystem, one of the most biologically diverse in North America, and home to endangered and protected species, including the ocelot, sea turtles, and the piping plover.
SpaceX is trampling over this entire site, singeing the wildlife, burning down part of the wildlife refuge. This region, most of the native habitat has been destroyed because of real estate development, industrialization, farming. We only have 3% left, and that 3% is being destroyed by SpaceX.
Hinosa co-founded the Texas Environmental Justice Center, and along with other national and local environmental organizations, is suing the FAA and SpaceX for violation of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. In order to build on the site, Musk had to do a thorough environmental impact statement, or EIS, under the National Environmental Protection Act. These reports are really comprehensive. They include impacts to air quality, carbon emissions, water usage, wildlife protection, as well as cultural and economic impacts. Initially, SpaceX got approval to launch the Falcon 9, a reliable and, after years of testing, safe rocket that takes cargo into lower orbit. But in 2018, SpaceX announced they would be launching the Starship Super Heavy, a rocket 20% larger than the Falcon 9 with 10 times the thrust. In a press conference, Musk said they would be testing their new rocket in Texas instead of the Kennedy Center in Florida because
it's got a lot of land with nobody around, so if it blows up, it's cool. If it blows up, it's cool.
This is a perfect example of a time the FAA should have conducted a second EIS, but instead did a simplified environmental assessment, or EA. Officials concluded that there would be no significant impact of launching this much larger rocket from Boca Chica Beach. That same year, before a single rocket took flight, SpaceX started a fire during an engine test that engulfed 68 acres of brushland in flames and burned through the night. In spite of this, the first launch of Starship was scheduled for April 20th, 2023, aka Weed Day. Here's how the launch was supposed to go. Starship was meant to orbit the Earth, with the booster landing in the Gulf of Mexico and the spaceship re-entering the atmosphere and landing in the Pacific Ocean. Instead, the launch pad exploded, sending debris across Boca Chica Beach and scorching more than 3 acres of land. A dust cloud poured over the nearby Port Isabel. Buildings shook, a window shattered.
Holy crap! Rocket is launching. See it on the ladder. It's like a soot. Big old layer cake of it. And they're trying to tell us it's sand.
SpaceX hadn't installed flame diverters, or a simple and very necessary water deluge system, sending shards of concrete and rebar all across the beach. The spaceship also failed to separate from the booster.
The entire Starship stack continuing to rotate. We should have had separation by now.
And spiraled in orbit before exploding and landing into the Gulf of Mexico. Elon looked disappointed, but SpaceX assured viewers it was a success.
You never know exactly what's going to happen, but as we promised, excitement is guaranteed.
What Elon Musk and what SpaceX tells people is that we are so efficient, we have to develop our rockets by just testing them in the real world. We're not going to use as many computer models to make sure that everything's perfect. And if it blows up, then we're going to get even more data. It's actually good if it blows up.
Eric Roche is an environmental engineer who writes about SpaceX at his blog ESG Hound.
Those failures have externalities. Every time you launch a rocket, there's a sound wave, there's pollution, you are disrupting people's way of life.
Roche documented the damage after that first launch. Burned nests and eggs, dust and chunks of concrete, and scraps of metal on the beach.
NASA launches mostly from Kennedy Space Center, which is thousands of acres that was allocated by Congress. And so it has a buffer built in. Whereas SpaceX's launch site in Boca Chica is a tiny little spot of land, and it's surrounded by land that they don't own. It's very close to populated areas. And so those externalities are going to be magnified just by orders of magnitude.
The Kennedy Space Center was built using eminent domain, approved by Congress in 1964. But Musk hasn't gone through that same process. He's just slowly expanding the scale and scope of his operation. Roche says it's eminent domain by fiat.
I have never experienced an earthquake until SpaceX. The earthquake that I experienced in my apartment, which is over 20 miles away, is an earthquake caused by a billionaire.
Before Musk could launch again, the FAA ground the Starship and launched an investigation, conducted by SpaceX, but overseen by the FAA. They found 63 things that needed to be changed before the Starship could launch again. Musk and his fans goaded officials on Twitter, which Musk owns and has renamed X.com. The investigation closed in September, and the second launch was in November 2023. It was another failure.
The Super Heavy booster has just experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
But in 2024, during Starship's fifth flight, the reusable booster separated and returned to the launch tower, which was a major accomplishment for SpaceX. However, not a single one of the launches has successfully gotten cargo into orbit. Musk continued to publicly beef with the FAA, and in September 2024, the FAA charged SpaceX $633,000 for safety violations at its Cape Canaveral station. Musk threatened to sue in return, but never did. As the 2024 election approached, he became increasingly vocal that a Trump victory would free SpaceX from unnecessary regulations.
I feel more optimistic about it with a Trump White House. The biggest impediment to progress that we're experiencing is overregulation. The bureaucracy in the U.S. has been growing every year.
And after Trump took office, the head of the FAA, Michael Whitaker, stepped down after serving only 15 months of his 5-year tenure. Musk had told him to resign on Twitter just a few months before. We went to Texas in January 2025, just as SpaceX was gearing up for their 7th launch of the Starship. Before every launch, people come from all over the country to tailgate, talk rockets, and perform light shows with their Cybertrucks.
The idea of colonizing the moon and going to Mars is also just really inspiring.
And it's inevitable. I think the Earth is not infinite in its resources, so we got to start looking elsewhere.
That same week, the FAA was hosting a public forum to talk about SpaceX, increasing the number of launches a year from 5 to 25. Both Madranos and Becca Hinosa were there.
An EA is a concise document used to describe the anticipated environmental impacts.
Residents were able to talk to SpaceX representatives and make comments to a court reporter. They asked about damages to their foundations and windows. They wanted to know how 25 launches a year would impact the fisheries and the wildlife.
The information that you're giving us is based on the 5.
Yeah.
Not on the
2022.
But that's also assuming that the climate is going to stay the same.
The window.
It takes about 30 seconds. It can be shaken here, but it's not expected to cause any serious damage to the houses.
25 makes me laugh, I mean, they had a hard time just with 5 or 6 and keeping all the debris that fall in the Gulf or fall in the bay or fall wherever it falls.
The FAA told us there wasn't a significant impact. We know that's not true. And what it looks like is the FAA, once again, just making steps to give SpaceX whatever license they want.
The FAA still hasn't announced whether or not SpaceX will be allowed to launch 25 times a year. The 7th launch was late, a week late. So the beach was closed on Friday, and then Saturday, Wednesday, and Thursday, when the rocket finally launched. It ended with an explosion over Turks and Caicos.
The vehicle just exploded. The stunning aftermath could be seen by passengers on a plane. This same flight to Miami was rerouted to avoid the debris. Other flights were also diverted.
The FAA ground SpaceX again. In December 2024, SpaceX made another surprise announcement. They would apply to incorporate the town of Starbase. For Starbase to become a town, they'll need 201 residents and a majority vote. Luckily for the future town of Starbase, the vast majority of residents in Boca Chica Village are now SpaceX employees that rent from their boss. As SpaceX was developing the Starship, they were also buying up houses in a tiny unincorporated resort town just a few miles from Boca Chica Beach. Boca Chica Village had just 38 houses, mostly occupied by part-time residents that winter in Texas. In 2019, SpaceX offered to buy out all of the residents, saying that with new FAA safety regulations, it wasn't safe for people to stay in the village.
This letter that SpaceX sent out is more of a bully attack, a hostile takeover.
But at the same time, SpaceX was moving their employees into town and expanding. Soon there were Airstream trailers lining the block, and a new name for the street that was once called Weem Street, Meme Street. If incorporated, Starbase could fund its own utilities, infrastructure, or security forces, and it could create its own local ordinances. It would no longer be a part of Brownsville.
It's one thing to come and try to work hand in hand with the community that's here, but it's another thing to absolutely, and I see this, the actual takeover of everything.
SpaceX has already proven to be a bad neighbor, and that's why most of us don't want it anymore.
You're gonna see Elon Musk a lot in the news these days for his role in dismantling key parts of our federal government. But the real purpose of Doge isn't efficiency, it's deregulation. Musk has shown he wants no oversight for himself or other billionaires like him. The story of Boca Chica is crucial to understanding Musk's playbook for seizing public resources and justifying his campaign as part of a grand vision for humanity, whether that's landing on Mars or creating a more efficient government, a revolution for the people, as he's called it.
I wonder, like, in 10 years, when he's done with whatever he's going to be doing, what's going to happen to this area? Who's going to pick up all this mess? Who's going to clean it up?
Thanks for watching The Classroom for More Perfect Union. We cover the small and large ways that the 1% are reshaping our world. Boca Chica is an extreme example, but you might also live in a community like that. If so, comment below. And as always, like and subscribe for more videos like this one.
Amazon never meant that. You know how they said that they were going to list the cost of the tariffs on their price tags, you know, how much more expensive their products were going to be because of the tariffs. They said that they were going to list the markup on the price tags. That's what they said they were going to do. So, of course, immediately the Trump administration responded and accused Amazon of collaborating with China, working with China and so on, being like an enemy, you know. So immediately they took back what they said. They said they're not going to do it. But obviously this was just a PR stunt from the beginning so that they can inflate the prices as much as they want and everybody will just chalk it up to the tariffs. Most likely Amazon is going to probably get the tariffs paid anyway by subsidies or tax cuts, quantitative easing or what have you. So they'll just increase the prices and have you think that it's all because of the tariffs and not because of greed. Even though your taxes are probably going to go to pay the tariffs on their behalf anyway. Like, you know, if Amazon wanted to be transparent, why not include how much the price is or how much of the price is a markup for executive salaries? Mark that down. Put that down. What's the markup on all goods anyway? You know, how much does it cost Amazon to buy what they're selling you as opposed to how much it costs you to buy it from Amazon? But they won't do that, obviously. They'll never do that. They're just going to price gouge, you know, off of the manufactured shortages from the tariffs and the fabricated overhead costs of the tariffs. Look, I think you have to start actually trying to accept what's happening now in the United States. It's kind of remarkable to me, frankly, that anyone can't process what's happening now, that they can't recognize what's happening now. Your docks, your shipyards are empty. Cargo vessels are not bringing goods. Your shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be shortages. There's going to be job losses across multiple sectors, not just retail. Shipping, trucking, dock workers, construction, the energy sector, hospitals, schools, on and on. It's not a trade war. This is an economic war being waged by the A-National OCGFC against the United States by means of the American government itself. And it's not covert by any stretch of the imagination. It's as blatant as it can be. As I've said before, this is a downsizing operation. And the trajectory is not hard to see, nor is the reasoning behind it. And it's not about Trump, like I said before. Trump was just given the task because he's the right one for the task. But the task was going to get assigned one way or the other to someone, and it was going to get executed one way or the other, because this is what has to happen. The paradigm is shifting. And if you're not aware of that, then once that paradigm has shifted, you will continue to operate in an obsolete paradigm, which is going to leave you completely helpless and completely vulnerable. Believe it or not, even though everyone thinks that I'm always expressing sort of gloom and doom about the United States, that's not accurate at all. Because believe it or not, I think that this can and should be a transformative and liberating moment, not only for the global South, but even for the people in the U.S., even for the people in the West. Because at moments of massive transition, you know, moments of collapse, well, you have your best opportunity at those moments for establishing new ways of doing things, new approaches, new structures, new intellectual models, new societal models. Because things are in flux, now more than any time in our lifetimes. The people, the population, can actually capture some influence, some sovereignty, some independence, and they can have some say. But you won't be able to do that if you convince yourself that what's happening is not really happening. If you convince yourself that you're just going through some normal cycle in politics, that's not what's going on. This period of history that we're living in right now Wallahi, I think this is going to be looked back upon in history as the beginning of the great reordering, the great decentralization. You know, the language that everyone uses now is about multipolarity or polycentrism or what have you. But that's what we're talking about. Like I said before, that's what it all means. It means decentralization. This is going to be the theme of this era. And it's going to be manifested across sectors and at multiple levels. You should anticipate this, and you should plan accordingly, and you should act accordingly. The world is decentralizing. Countries are going to be decentralizing, particularly in the West. Do you see what I mean? The same way that you talk about a multipolar world, this is going to happen on the country level as well. You know, in terms of the cohesion and the authority of the federal government, of national government. And then if you're in the US, if you're in America, for example, it's going to happen at the state level too. Every tier of the formal power structure is going to be decentralized to one degree or another. Or rather, it's going to be dismantled. It's going to be hollowed out. And what's going to make that deterioration and that hollowing out process, what's going to turn that into decentralization rather than just collapse, is going to be the emergence of alternative power structures, informal power structures, or private sector power structures, which is going to happen anyway. So basically, you're either going to have only corporate-led alternatives to state power, or you will have corporate-led alternatives to state power, and in addition to that, you will have people-led alternatives to state power. So you see what I mean about how this is an opportunity for truly transformative change. Now is your chance to actively participate in trying to create rules for how society is supposed to operate. I think that the United States is going to be undergoing a controlled collapse over at least the next decade or so. We're entering a decade of manufactured disorder. Tariffs, inflation, supply chain breakdowns, mass layoffs. None of this is accidental. It's the strategic culling of the middle class. It's the decoupling of state economies, and it's the delegitimization of government itself, except as enforcers. But even so-called law enforcement is going to be more and more privatized, most likely. Militarized and privatized. The goal here is not to fix the system. The goal is to discredit the idea of national governance entirely and to make way for something else. That's the whole point, making way for something else. A corporate system that operates like a stateless regime, autonomous, automated, and above the law. Already you see it. You know, governments can't regulate big tech. They can't control currency flows and on and on and on. They can't even feed their own people without corporate intermediaries. So you're going to see corporations offering their own education, their own security, their own housing, you know, and even their own governance. Because the states are going to be bankrupt, financially and morally. I mean, think smart cities, 15-minute cities, and so on, you know, those gated communities. See, once private sector power has surpassed state power, then the OCGFC don't even need to rule over states anymore. They just need them out of the way. They need them to fail. They need it so that then they can fill the vacuum, you know. After about a decade or so of erosion, national institutions are going to collapse under the weight of debt, under the weight of division and dysfunction, and corporate cartels will step in. Not openly, you know, not with armies. It'll be with apps, with contracts, with APIs. You know, we're talking about de facto power, not formal official power. Official power will still be duplicitously attributed to feckless government bodies, and you'll get to distract yourselves as a population with the charade of political activism, fighting over who's going to be in charge of these empty institutions. You know, you're going to go to a school that's funded by a conglomerate. You'll be treated in a hospital that's run by a hedge fund, and you'll pay for it for the rest of your life. You know, if you get sick, if you have an injury, if you need any sort of medical treatment at all, you're entering into debt slavery. These companies are going to be the de facto governments without any voting, without any representation, without any accountability. No accountability, just terms of service. By 2045, citizenship is basically going to be a subscription service, probably sooner. But this model isn't sustainable because human beings are not assets. They're not just data sets. They're not just markets. They're souls. And the soul rebels against this kind of thing. That's why you need to start now, working towards community sovereignty in your own communities. Not the nationalistic kind, not flag waving, but values-based, spiritually anchored. Create locally embedded systems of local governance, local trade, you know? Because when the system collapses, people are not going to need just food and water. They're going to need a whole framework. They're going to need a whole framework a way to understand the world in the wake of this collapse. They're going to need a moral compass. They're going to need a functional economic model and a system of legitimate authority at a local level. You need to build an alternative civilization, is what I'm saying. Not just as a theory, but as a practice. You know, I shouldn't say alternative civilization because you don't have a civilization now, to be honest. So I'm saying that you need to use this transitional period, this period of collapse, to actually finally build a civilization from the ground up. Resource sovereignty on a community level, communities that control their own food, their own water, their own energy through collective cooperation. Economic decentralization, abolish this rentier capitalism. Introduce value-backed or labor-backed local currencies. Believe me, you can do this. Contributive labor systems. Now is the time to try to use your imagination. You need moral governance. Whether you like it or not, you need decision-making based on accountability to the creator and responsibility to the creation. I don't care if you're atheist or not. I don't care what your belief may or may not be. But you're not going to get anywhere by basing decision-making on arbitrary, capricious, ad hoc morality. That's what you've been doing, and it's gotten you where you are now. And you need transnational solidarity, collecting like-minded communities across borders. Not so that you can form a state, but so that you can form an order. You know, you need to start brainstorming new models. The OCGFC operate with transnational solidarity. They built a system of order without borders. You should too. I've said it before. This is not utopian. This is strategic inevitability, if you're serious. Because when the OCGFC fails to deliver dignity, and they will, when governments fail to deliver survival, which they will fail, then the world is going to turn to those who can provide meaning and who can provide function and can provide both of these in tandem. And if that's not going to be you, it's going to be Jeff Bezos. It's going to be Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Fink. Please understand, you're not powerless in this situation. You don't have to just be spectators. You can be the early builders of the next era. The OCGFC have a plan, so should we have a plan. The question isn't if the system is going to collapse. That's already underway. The question is what is going to rise in its place. So you should try to make sure that it is something that is worthy of the human soul. Obviously, the first thing that you're going to have to do is get beyond the twin lies that you've been told all your life, the twin lies that act as the major blinders to your vision in terms of being able to think about other ways of doing things. Of course, I'm talking about the twin lies of democracy and capitalism. The lie that America even practices either one because it doesn't, and it never has. And in fact, nobody does, truth be told. And nobody ever has. See, you invested so much alleged virtue in those two words that now you have to pretend that that's what you practice over there, you know, and you have to reject anything that doesn't go by those words, democracy and capitalism. But again, the fact of the matter is that the thing that those names supposedly means does not exist and never did, not in your country and not anywhere else. No theoretical model of government actually exists in real life. There's no virtue in a theoretical form of government that doesn't exist in real life. And there's no virtue in an economic system or a theory of economic management that doesn't exist in the real world, in real life. Every government, every power structure, every state is just pragmatic. That's all. There's no fancy word for that. There's no noble sounding, decorative term for how states actually operate in the real world. It's just the necessities of power, and those necessities are determined by culture, by morality, and by the priorities of that culture, and in accordance with the prevailing morality of that culture. In other words, power is going to act however it acts because of the instincts and the value system of any given society. And in the West, in Western society, that has always meant that the priority of power is consolidation, accumulation of power, wealth, and resources, and the suppression of anything and anyone that challenges that. That's the Western priority system. But every state, every power structure is the same insofar as it actually only adheres to pragmatism, not to any pristine theoretical model of governance. That's just the name that they put on what they do. Because obviously you don't have democracy in the United States. You don't have democracy and you don't have capitalism either. I hate to tell you. So actually there's no real reason why you should cling to these words or pretend to cling to these words when you don't actually practice them as it is. And you never did. You see what I mean? They've got you so invested in thinking that these two things, these two systems, this political system and this economic system, are the best systems in the world, that you'll reject anything that doesn't have that label on it. Meanwhile, you don't actually have that system in your own society. In real life, you're not a democracy and you're not capitalist. No, the United States is not what it claims to be. It's not the land of liberty. It's not the beacon of democracy. It's not the heartland of capitalism. America is just the nucleus of an engineered illusion. It's a global advertisement for a system that does not exist in practice, only in narrative. Only in narrative. And that narrative has only ever been used just to hold you back and to hold you down. To hold you down from ever pursuing any real change or improvement. And they limit you always in this simplistic, oppositional, binary thinking all the time about everything. You know, either democracy or tyranny, capitalism or communism, Republican or Democrat, black or white, for us or against us, win or lose, zero sum, on and on. Your minds are trained like this to stifle you from engaging with complexity. Why? Because the world is complex. And they don't want you to navigate the world outside of their instructions, outside of their guidance, outside of their framework. You know, capitalism and communism or socialism or Marxism or whatever. They make you think that these are the only options, that the only options that you have are Western models, theoretical models that are on the table, you know? And just like that, what they think about black and white in the United States, you got the one drop rule, you know, so one drop of socialism means it is socialism. Meanwhile, corporations are welfare queens. Your democracy is an oligarchy. But as long as you can put that democratic label on it, then you get to pretend that your system that bears no resemblance to a democracy is a democracy. You know, and as long as you've got 50 different types of toothpaste at the grocery store, then you have capitalism. And you stay invested in these falsely labeled systems, you know. Okay, you hold elections, you have your flags, you have your televised debates. That's not a democracy. That's choreography. You know, twice in the last generation, the person who won the presidency in America was actually rejected by the popular vote. Why? Well, everyone knows why. Because of the Electoral College, which is nothing but a relic designed to protect the slave states. And every election, every presidential election, they have to explain to you again why maintaining the Electoral College somehow makes sense. And somehow it doesn't actually subvert democracy, and it's a good idea. And it's all just confusing enough to make you feel ignorant whenever it's talked about. And then you just stop bringing it up if your candidate happens to be the one who's appointed. And in America, you've got the gerrymandering with the districts and such. That's not a bug. That's a feature of the system. Districts are redrawn not to represent people, to protect power. It's not governance. That's electoral fraud through legal paperwork, and everybody knows it. You're blocking people out of the system. I mean, millions of citizens are blocked from voting through voter ID laws, felony disenfranchisement, purges of the voter rolls. These aren't safeguards. These are all filters designed to maintain the demographic status quo of control. And you and I both know it. You got states with tiny populations that have the same representation as states with tens of millions of people. That's not democracy. That's like a veto by geography. And then you have, obviously, the Citizens United decision that turned money into speech. So the billionaires and corporations now speak a louder voice than millions of people. They write the laws and they tell the politicians what to pass of those laws. This isn't a secret. What democracy? You know, you're given two options. Both of those two options are funded by the same interests. This isn't a choice. It's a political cartel. What democracy? You know, you've got lifetime judges who are appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. They overturn laws that the public supports, and they set court-made laws that the public opposes. What democracy? And all your politicians engage in insider trading with no consequences. You know, you pay for their crimes and they get reelected. You claim to be a capitalist society, but capitalism requires free markets, actually free markets, you know, which includes risk and competition. None of that exists in America. What exists is corporatism, collusion between the state and private power to rig economic outcomes and to protect the elite and to impoverish everyone else. Billions of subsidies go to corporations. Banks, oil companies, you know, agribusiness, they get public money, subsidies and so on. While public schools and clinics go into decay. You know, all your biggest companies are insulated from risk, too big to fail. So they can be irresponsible, they can be negligent, they can make terrible decisions, and it's fine. Taxpayers are going to cover their losses, that's fine. That's not capitalism. No one covers the losses for small businesses. The market punishes the poor and rescues the rich. That's how you work. The Federal Reserve, which is a private institution, by the way, dictates artificial interest rates, printing money. You know, you need a license to braid hair in America. You put up all of these barriers to block the lower class from even being able to enter the economy. And you create these patent monopolies. IP laws don't protect creativity. They protect control, you know, keeping medicine, software, all sorts of knowledge locked behind paywalls. That's anti-competition. It's anti-innovation. That's not capitalism. This is not capitalism. It's state-managed cronyism. Not to mention the military-industrial complex. They don't compete. They have no bid contracts. Your system is a system of privatizing the gains, but socializing the losses. Profits are private, losses are public. You pay, they profit every time. You have socialism for the rich, but you have market rules for the poor. And the tax code is a labyrinth of loopholes. You know, Amazon pays zero, you pay everything, and you have no say in where your tax money is spent, how it's spent. That's not taxation, that's tribute. Small businesses drown in compliance regulations, but the large businesses write the rules in the first place, and they get to bypass them. They tell you that that's all capitalism, and they tell you that capitalism is good, and you're supposed to be happy with that. But you have to understand this. Democracy and capitalism in the United States are just labels that they put on their system, which is actually only about total power consolidation. These labels are just tools of containment. It's a dual lock mechanism that maintains elite supremacy while convincing the masses that they're free. These are two eye patches that they put on your eyes. It's not a democratic republic. It's not capitalism. It's a corporate oligarchy with theatrical rituals to make it appear legitimate. You should stop looking at the United States for any sort of a model. Even the model that they claim to follow and that they say everyone else that they want everyone else to follow, they don't follow. Their economy is a facade. It's a facade. Its politics are performance. And its institutions are designed not to empower, but to pacify people. And like I said, they keep you locked down with these labels, democracy, capitalism, and so on. These so-called political and economic models, even when they don't exist in the real world. Also that you will never pursue alternatives. You know, they sacralized the words democracy and capitalism, and they told you that that's what you have, so you have to be happy with that. So if you start trying to build alternatives, then it's basically sacrilege. Yes, I said build alternatives. I didn't say look for alternatives from the existing political and economic models that are out there, because none of them exist in the real world, just in theory. Like I said, every country is a pragmatic hybrid, doing what they need to do to manage their societies according to the priorities that are dictated by their cultures and by their morality. There's no name for that. There's no label for that, and there doesn't have to be. But look, like I said, your society is heading for the rocks. And you have every right, and in fact, you have every responsibility to try to save yourselves and to try to save your families and to try to save your community as best you can. You don't owe anything to the people who steered that ship into the rocks. And you'd be a fool to trust them or to think that they have your best interests in mind. No, you need to start building alternatives just so that you can survive and your families can survive. But you need to take those eye patches off. You need to look at the world with open eyes. I mean, let me speak plainly. What's unfolding in the United States, you really need to understand this. This is not a passing phase. This is not a dip in the cycle. This is a structural transformation taking place, and it's not in your favor. The conditions that you're heading into, and which in many ways you're already inside of, the conditions that you're heading into are not the product of incompetence. They're the result of deliberate, systemic design, engineered scarcity, institutionalized theft, the planned obsolescence of the middle class. And it's really crucial for you to get the idea out of your head that incompetence has anything to do with it. Because if you don't get it out of your head, then you're going to keep holding on to the false hope that some politician is going to come along and get you out of this mess. You're going to keep thinking that, you know, maybe if you just vote differently, things might change. No, you need to understand you are being deliberately, calculatedly, and willfully put down. And it's bipartisan and it's unanimous that this is going to be your future. Prices are rising, food, rent, fuel, electricity, not randomly, not accidentally. This is not hyperinflation. This is slow suffocation. It's the erosion of your purchasing power. You know, you might see an extra dollar on your paycheck if they do a wage rise, but it's not going to buy what it could have bought you last year. There's not progress. There's bait and switch. Your standard of living is not going to be able to be maintained except by working longer hours, taking side hustles, you know, cutting back on family time, free time, and so on. That's the New Deal. This is not a recession. This is a regime. Wages are not going to catch up, not because they can't catch up, but because the labor market is being redesigned. The expansion of gig work, temporary contracts. This isn't a consequence of hard times. This is the consequence of a new model that's being pushed. A system of job insecurity is being normalized. Benefits are a new luxury. Full-time employment is a relic of the past. Please understand what's happening to you. Banks are not just being cautious about lending. They're weaponizing credit. You're being turned into vehicles for intergenerational debt. Car payments, mortgages, even credit cards, all of this is going to be used punitively. Defaults are going to rise. Bankruptcies will climb. Home ownership is going to become nothing but a fantasy. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system. There's no policy solution because the policy makers serve the architects of your distress. This is how it's going to be from here on out. Understand, stress is going to be your constant companion. Anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, all of this is going to rise. But mental health services are going to recede behind paywalls. Crime is going to rise, not because of moral decline, not because people are getting worse, but because they're getting more and more cornered. Your neighborhood is going to become more dangerous, not because people are getting worse, but because making your neighborhood more dangerous is what the system is programmed to happen. Childcare, education, healthcare, these are going to become financial death sentences. You're going to have to choose between wellness and rent, between school books and groceries. You're probably already having to make those choices. This is what collapse looks like. Social bonds, community is going to fray. Local businesses are going to shut down. There's going to be fewer and fewer social activities. Time with family, time with friends is going to disappear. And you're going to retreat inward unless you resist that consciously and strategically, because survival is going to require you rehumanizing daily life intentionally, because they're trying to dehumanize it. Everyone who has assets, significant assets, real estate, stocks, precious metals, political connections, obviously they're going to be fine. They're going to thrive. They're going to buy up more land. They're going to buy up more homes. They're going to buy up more businesses, because your hardship is their opportunity. That's the system that your culture created. That's the system that your culture created. You're going to see the rise of extremism, far right, far left, religious cults, separatist movements, racist movements, fueled by the rage and the pain and the deepening distrust that everyone in the society has towards the institutions that are supposed to be serving them. And that distrust is justified. So what are people going to do? Well, they're going to move. More and more people are going to move out of the cities to cheaper regions, into the rural areas, if they're smart. They're going to try to close off as much of their debts as they can, downsize their lives. You know, a lot of people who are living on the street today are only living in the street because they tried to maintain a standard of living that they couldn't maintain, rather than downsize. They refused to downgrade their lives. So instead of downgrading their standard of living, they got evicted. You have to make hard choices, and you have to make them fast. This is like the opposite of the fear of missing out, FOMO. This is the desperate hope that somehow you're going to be able to dodge all of the bullets that are being fired at you from every side by the economy where you can't. Once you realize that this model doesn't work for you and that it was never meant to work for you, then you can start unplugging from it. And you can start trying to construct something new. You know, try to invest in what they can't take, your skills, your relationships, your community. Don't just prepare for scarcity, prepare for sovereignty. Because the reality is that you do not need a new financial model. You do not need a new political model or economic model. You need a new civilizational model. You need a strategy for dignity in a world that is collapsing under engineered disorder. You need grounded resistance that's ethical, intelligent, and collective. That's what I'm talking about. You cannot have a political or economic revolution without first having a cultural revolution. I mean, let me put it simply. The situation you're heading towards, your money is not going to stretch very far. Your workload is going to increase. Your access to basic goods is going to decline. By 2030, I would think that your purchasing power is probably going to decline by at least 10 to 15%. You should look for whole cities and whole states to go bankrupt with increasing frequency, fiscal crises, all while the government is going to deny that you're even in a recession. They're probably going to claim that you're in a recovery. They'll probably even try to tell you that it's the best economy ever. The economy is booming. But I wouldn't be surprised if by 2030 it's going to take 30 to 40% of your income just to buy groceries. If food banks were listed on the stock exchange, that would be the best investment you could make right now, because they're going to be booming, just like Starbucks was in the early 2000s. The new franchise opportunity, food banks. So aside from the obvious immediate steps that individuals should take, like trying to get rid of your debt, stop using your credit cards, cancel your subscriptions, try to put at least a couple of $1,000s in cash aside for emergencies, and try to shift as much cash as you can out of your savings account and try to hold it in a mix of, cash, silver, gold, so on, commodities. Try to buy as much durable goods as you can right now. You need to start right now trying to plant the seeds for longer term solutions. And as soon as you start brainstorming about alternatives for economic survival, for long term solutions, you're going to immediately see how important community is. You're going to understand then exactly why your power structure has always engineered your atomization and your isolation. Why they want you to not know your neighbors. Why they want everyone to be glued to their phones. Why they want you to be antisocial. They want you to be rude and selfish and obnoxious. Why they groom every man to act like a tough guy. Why they groom every woman to be catty. Why they want every person to basically stay triggered 24/7. Because if you're going to survive, you're going to have to survive as a community. You're going to have to actually get along with people. You can't be combative and argumentative and petty and confrontational, spiteful, paranoid, the way you people are. You have to build community. You have to actually try to get along with people. You could create contributive ecosystems in your communities rather than competitive markets, rather than dog eat dog. Shift from a consumer to producer role by encouraging your community to form small interlinked collectives based on locality, where each member contributes labor, skills, or goods in return for mutual access to necessities, food, goods, and so on, education, services, not for individual profit, but for collective self-sufficiency, actual cooperation. You can organize neighborhood syndicates, that collectively import essential items from non-tariff countries, or that even directly produce goods with 3D printers and so forth, community-run cooperatives and so on. I'm telling you, you need to think about the fact that state governance, federal governments, is going to disintegrate. It's disintegrating now. The state's only function is going to be to police you, not to provide for you, not to protect you. So if you have any sense at all, then you're going to need to start looking at the state as an occupation force that you have to do your best to try to circumvent, to try to navigate your way around. Because their job is going to be literally to disenfranchise you, dispossess you, disempower you, impoverish, and subjugate you. Mark my words. I'm not being hyperbolic. That's what's going to happen. So you need to put it in your mind that your community is like a people living under occupation. I'm completely serious about this. And you're going to have to do all that you can to try to create your own system of order locally, your own system of management, your own system of survival, independent of the state, independent of the system. And yes, that means creating your own culture locally, a healthy culture, so that the localized system that you build will have humane, healthy, and moral priorities, unlike the state. I'm not saying that this is going to happen immediately, even though we can already see that it is underway in America and in the West generally. But you're moving towards a total system collapse. And I'm not talking about some post-apocalyptic scenario. No, this isn't a zombie movie. But if you want to compare what life was like in the year 2000 with what it's like in 2025, and then you compare what 2045 is going to be like compared to today, it's going to be a dramatic and very grim contrast. But you see, they do it in slow motion. They do it incrementally so that it becomes normalized. But that's why I'm saying you need to start now. You need to start building now. Actually participate in your own survival. Listen, the whole underpinnings of Western so-called civilization are flawed and they're toxic. That's why it built the systems that it built. The scarcity model of economics, the extractive, exploitative mentality. That whole mindset is hostile. You need to transcend that. Like even with money, like I said, you can actually create collective mutual support networks within your community, and you can decide for yourselves how you're going to mediate exchange of goods and services yourselves. You don't have to take their model. You don't have to take their approaches as a given. You could establish credit systems internal to your communities. You know, develop some sort of a value-backed type of a currency, or a labor-backed currency, digital or paper-based. You know, it's like an alternative currency that's issued locally, redeemable in goods and services from participating members, but pegged to effort or contribution, not to fiat. You know, create a registry where hours of work across all different fields are valued in units and stored in personal ledgers, allowing for trade even if money gets devalued. You know, redemption via purpose. These credits can be redeemed not just for goods, but for educational access, services, and so forth, linking economy to social agency. These kinds of projects exist in New York, in Switzerland, and other places, where you have local currencies that are pegged to service hours and contribution. I mean, imagine if you could actually secure your basic needs through an alternative local currency, you know, credit for work or credit for service, and you could redeem that at participating stores, participating vendors, and service providers, instead of using dollars from your job. Well, you could actually start saving money, saving dollars, if you could actually secure your needs through an alternative form of exchange. Like I said, these types of things do exist, and you can learn from those existing initiatives. It's not undoable. But let me tell you something that's going to be difficult for many people to accept. The collapse of the United States, economically, socially, and morally, was not caused by an external enemy. It's not the fault of China. It's not the fault of immigrants. It's not the fault of elections that didn't go your way. It's not even the fault of just corrupt elites. No, the collapse was philosophical. It was spiritual. It was civilizational. The rot began at the root. They built a civilization where the highest value was materialism, where worth was measured in consumption, where success meant accumulation, where GDP growth was more important than human dignity or societal well-being. They mistook endless accumulation for life's purpose, and in so doing, they starved their own souls of meaning. I mean, that would have been enough to lead them astray, but it didn't stop there. They championed individualism to the point of pathology, glorifying personal ambition and disdaining collective responsibility. Their economy wasn't designed to sustain, it was designed to extract. It's a culture focused exclusively on short-termism, the addiction to quarterly profits, election cycles, 24-hour news, the inability to think past next week, let alone the next generation, and everybody has to kiss the ring of the invisible hand of the market. So in the end, this civilization didn't fall because it was attacked. It fell because it forgot what civilization even means, what it's supposed to mean. It forgot what it means to be human. So if there's any path to reconstruction, it has to begin by recentering human life around meaning, not around materialism. Balancing individual initiative against communal obligation. You know, building economies that are based on reciprocity, not robbery. Institutionalize long-term thinking. Try to constrain the market within the boundaries of morality. I mean, why on earth would you have ever accepted it to be otherwise? And yes, I said reconstruction, not reform, not rescue, not restoration. The system that you built cannot and should not be saved. You don't need to try to save it. You need to try to save yourselves from it. You need to jumpstart yourselves out of the habit of passivity. Like I said, I get accused of engaging in doom and gloom. But that's because you've gotten so habituated to helplessness. Yes, you're going to have to face severe economic hardship. But okay, frame economic turmoil not as the end, but as the end of a broken system, the delegitimization of a broken system. A way to trigger, inshallah, a cultural shift from consumption to meaning, from job-based identity to a character-based identity. You need to start trying to think of yourself, your community, as a small, non-aligned state that's navigating regional instability. Think like that, behave like that, plan like that, because that is essentially what your communities are, what they're going to be. You need to engage in a kind of micro-diplomacy locally. with foreign diaspora communities, with immigrant communities who maintain ties to non-U.S. trade networks, especially BRICS-aligned countries. And maybe you can get access to alternative supply chains, informal commerce for your communities and neighborhoods, because you need to build self-sufficiency. The aim here is not to try to survive the collapse in a state of desperation and regress into self-isolation. You need to build resilience. You need to build systems that are ethical, that are collective, that are non-corporate, and that are ultimately liberatory. Moving forward, it's going to be very important for you to remember that collapse is not catastrophe. It's clarification. The deeply flawed and, in fact, corrupt architecture of the Western system has been exposed. And without that exposure, no one would have been forced to ever recognize how profoundly you need to change. Americans looking at empty shelves at the grocery store is going to be like man looking at the abyss. As long as those shelves are full, then you'll never see how empty your so-called civilization is and how empty it has made you. No, you need a whole cultural, psychological, and civilizational realignment. That's why I said no Western theories are going to be able to provide a remedy for you. Your so-called leftists, they'll say that wealth redistribution will solve all the problems. But that doesn't alter the fundamental structure that led to the disparities in the first place. Nah, the leftists, the Marxists, and so on, they're just as much about money and materialism as the capitalists are. Redistribution without structural correction is just a management strategy for continuing the injustice and the oppression. For the West, the only framework that you have is either private property or communal ownership. Capitalism, communism. Either private property or state ownership. Private property, yes or no. That same old binary thinking, You don't have a concept that understands our relationship to wealth, our relationship to property, as one of stewardship and custodianship, or as a conduit. It's about circulation, not accumulation. Wealth isn't something to brag about. It's something that you will be asked about, what you did with it and what you did to get it. But you can't get past the having it part, You need to get past that. But the whole system that you have has put you in such a desperate situation that you can't get past that. And see, they've got you feeling obliged to these systems that don't fulfill any obligations to you. They have you feeling obliged to it, so that you think that if you abandon those systems, you abandon those theories, you abandon those labels like democracy, capitalism, so on, you think it's some kind of betrayal or some sort of a rebellion. Because again, you have that combative mindset, the with us or against us mentality, even though the us in that frame is actually against you too. No, realignment is not rebellion, it's recovery. It's a recovery from all of the damage that your so-called civilization has done to you. And all the damage that is done to everyone else in the world. I mean, I know transformation is going to be hard. You're literally going to have to start from zero. But it has been so wrong for so long that just getting back to zero is actually progress. Because what I'm talking about, the type of changes that I'm talking about, the type of changes that you need to make, what I'm talking about is for you to actually return to the way that healthy societies always used to function before those Western predatory, parasitic, materialistic pathologies took over and drained all meaning from your life. That's why I say realignment, because you're disaligned now. You're dislocated, you're disjointed, you're dysfunctional, and you're broken. And you need to get back into alignment with what it means to be a human being.
In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about democracy. I mean, it was fine if a government was elected and would cooperate with us, but if it didn't, then democracy didn't mean a thing to us. And I don't think it means a thing today. The true goal of the United States government is control. And they feel that if the United States did not control the governments of Latin America, then somebody else would. And the principle of government by the people, for the people, of the people, that is that's just silly.
Intro to Robin Hood, 2010. Notice how the intro's gone? You can't read it. can't read what it says. Do you know what it says? You know what it's supposed to say? It's supposed to say, in times of tyranny and injustice, when law oppresses the people, the outlaw takes his place in history. I wonder why, right now, Amazon Prime would take that out.